As we saw in the last video, in 1942, we start to see the tide turn in the Pacific. Just as a reminder, in December of 1941, you have the Japanese attack of Pearl Harbor, which brings the United States into World War II. And as we get into 1942, you have the Doolittle raid on the mainland of Japan, which is a psychological victory for America and the Allies. Then you have the Battle of Coral Sea, and then Midway. Midway in particular was a huge, actually I shouldn't put red there, I should just leave it blue. It was a huge success for the American Navy, followed by Guadalcanal, where the U.S. is actually, after which, is able to go on the offensive against the Japanese. So we see a significant turning of the tide in 1942 in the Pacific. And it also turns out to be the case in Europe, that we see a turning of the tide in 1942. Just as Guadalcanal is occurring, you might remember that in 1941, Hitler and the Nazis decide that they want to attack the Soviet Union. Probably not a good idea. They're going to stretch themselves thin, but they do so anyway. They have the siege of Leningrad starts in 1941, and then in 1942, by August, they're able to reach Stalingrad, which is right about here. And Stalingrad, it's now called Volgograd. It's right about there, if the map extended over there. This is a major, I guess you could say, battle or even series of battles in World War II. Movies are made about Stalingrad. Incredibly bloody, incredibly kind of this, really, if you look at pictures of the city of Stalingrad after the siege, after the battles there, the city is essentially in ruins. But Stalingrad, the battle, or the battles, I guess you could say, at Stalingrad, they start in August of 1942, and they continue for several months, going up to February of 1943. But this marks the turning point for Hitler. He's getting bogged down in Leningrad, getting bogged down in Stalingrad, eventually gets defeated in Stalingrad in early 1943, and his armies are really, really, really spread thin. So Stalingrad is a hugely important event or series of events in World War II. And let's just be clear where we are right now. Stalingrad commences in August of 1942. And just to kind of frame it in your mind, relative to the Pacific Theater, this is right around, plus or minus a few weeks of when Guadalcanal was going on, conflict between the Japanese and the American navies. So you have this incredibly bloody battle or series of battles at Stalingrad. Then in October, we've been talking about this back and forth in North Africa. And some people say, well, why are they even worried about North Africa? And I should have mentioned this earlier, but we have to remember that there's something, somewhat strategic here called the Suez Canal. Why is the Suez Canal strategic? Well, it connects the Mediterranean with the Red Sea and then eventually the Indian Ocean. So that you don't have to go all the way around Africa to go from Europe to the Indian Ocean. So it's an incredibly strategic, passage or a way to travel by sea between, well, I guess for the world, but especially between Europe and between Asia. And so you can imagine the British were very keen on protecting the Suez Canal, and the Axis would have loved to get control of the Suez Canal. Let me write this here. This right over here is the Suez Canal. And as we go into October, so this is Stalingrad commences right over here. And then as we go into October, you have the British are able to defeat the Axis, or start to defeat the Axis, and then push them back. And this eventually leads to the British being able to go all the way to Tunisia. So this is kind of the final back and forth blow that kind of starts to secure victory for the Allies in North Africa. And at the same time that this is commencing in October, you have other Allied forces starting to arrive in Morocco and Algeria. Forces from the U.S. are arriving in Morocco, and forces from the U.K., from Great Britain, are arriving in Algeria. So this is going to give the Allies control of North Africa, from which they can now mount assaults onto the European mainland, which we will see in the next series of videos. So definitely the tide is turning, and the Allies are starting to be able to go on the offensive, both in the Pacific and in the European theater.